Hello, welcome to our session, Racial Equity and Targeted Recruitment and Support, Strategies for Reaching and Engaging Families of Color. We're really excited that you're attending this session. I am Alicia Groh. I'm a consultant with AdoptUSKids. I've had the privilege of working with dozens of child welfare systems, foundations, nonprofits, and other community groups working on recruitment, development, and support of foster and adoptive and kinship families. And so I'm really excited to be part of this session, talking about strategies, key concepts, and ways to improve this work really through a racial equity lens. I'm now going to let you hear from my co-presenters as they introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Kenisha Coon, and I am a child welfare trainer currently with the state of Michigan. I've been working in child welfare field adoption for the past almost 10 years, and I love it. I also do a lot of DEI and race equity consulting and work, and it's absolutely my passion. So I'm super excited to be with you all today talking about race equity and specifically talking about targeted recruitment, as I am a recent graduate of the Minority Professional Leadership Development Program. My project was around targeted recruitment, and I'm excited to share with you some of my outcomes and new strategies for that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ligia Cushman. I am a national child welfare consultant with AdoptUSKids. I have been working in the area of child welfare, specifically in foster care and adoption, for about 20 years. I'm dating myself now. I'm also an adoptive parent, and so this conversation is near and dear to me as well. And like Kenisha, I am also a MPLD alumni, and we'll share a little bit more about that training program as we move forward with our conversation today. Before we get started, I wanted to just acknowledge that today's conversation may require a heavy lift from all of us. And so I wanted to do some level setting so that we can all just be on the same page and kind of have some norms for how this conversation may be challenging for us in different ways. The first thing I wanted to ask is for everyone to just think about staying engaged in the conversation. And that means emotionally connected, remaining morally and intellectually connected to the conversation we're sharing with you today. We know also that when having conversations about race and racial equity and inclusion, we're going to experience discomfort, and that's okay. It's actually what we expect for people to feel a little uncomfortable, to feel as though we're talking about issues that are hard, but that we know that conversations like this don't create this divisiveness. It's actually a step in the right direction to move beyond the work that we've been doing to date. And then we're going to speak some truth today as well. We're going to share some ideas and some tips and strategies and key concepts that may be useful for you in the work that you do. We just hope that this is a safe space where we can share this work with you. And then finally, I want to make sure that we're acknowledging, like we said, we're acknowledging discomfort. And in that discomfort, we need to accept, respect, and accept non-closure. We are fully aware that this is a 90-minute training webinar, and we are aware that in those minutes that we are also speaking to we're also understanding that we're not here to solve the issue of racial equity and child welfare. We're here to have a conversation and hopefully provide some tips and strategies to what we can do differently.
Great. So with that level setting, we want to start in on this important conversation. And as Ligia said, we want to highlight tips and strategies throughout this session. But before we get into those really concrete strategies and practices you may be able to use, I want to talk a little bit about how thinking about our pool of families, of resource families, connects to the idea of racial equity. For some people, it may seem like a really clear connection, and for others, it may feel like we're talking about two different things. So I want to get us all on the same page as we think about that. So as we think about the idea of addressing racial equity through how we build and sustain that pool of families for children who are in foster care, there are a few key ideas that are really important that'll be threads that run through this session. So as you likely know, in most child welfare systems, children of color are overrepresented in foster care. And in most places, we see that children of color are even more overrepresented among children who are waiting to be adopted, and that they often wait longer than their white counterparts in foster care. So that's part of the grounding for this conversation, is really understanding the disproportionality and the overrepresentation that children of color experience in foster care and as they await permanency. And so as we think about that pool of families, especially the pool of prospective adoptive families who are looking to provide permanency for children, we really need to think about ways to have that pool of families reflect the diversity, reflect the race and ethnicity of the children who are waiting to be adopted. So how are we building a diverse pool and supporting that pool of families so that we have families who really reflect the diversity of children who are waiting, and that we have that recognition that we need to be really intentional about that as we build and sustain that pool. In many places, we hear that that is not the case yet, that the pool of families who are waiting to be adoptive parents for children in foster care or are foster parents, that they don't reflect that same diversity of children in care. So we hear the need for strategies to really change that. So we have these key ideas that we're aiming for, that we need to both recruit and then support that pool of families that reflects the diversity and the race and ethnicity of children who are waiting to be adopted. That needs to be an intentional approach and goal. And we've said here very specifically that we need to both recruit and support that pool, because just recruiting those families isn't enough. We need to help them stay engaged through the process, be supported so that they remain a resource for our children. We also really need to use data in thoughtful ways to do this. So our data should help us understand what our recruitment and support priorities are based on what we see in terms of disproportionality and disparity of outcomes for children of color. We can also use that data to see where we are having challenges in effectively recruiting families of color, but also supporting families of color. So that data can drive our priorities, but also our strategies and seeing our points of intervention that we need to look to. And I want to just acknowledge this, that this is not, this will not solve disproportionality or disparity, this effort to look at building and sustaining that pool of families. Certainly looking at the dynamics and the drivers of disproportionality and disparity in child welfare systems, it goes far beyond what we can do at this part of the process. And certainly when we're looking at children who are waiting to be adopted, we know that many things start far upstream from that. And so we want to acknowledge that our conversation today is just looking at one smaller piece of this whole puzzle. But it's important to think about where can we make progress in addressing disproportionality and disparity. So although this effort won't solve all of that, we can really take this as one key step to make sure that as children are coming into foster care at disproportionate rates for children of color, we hope that is being addressed in really intentional and thoughtful ways, and that child welfare systems and communities as a whole are addressing that. But we can do this as one step among many that need to be taken.
Thank you, Alicia. Before we move into strategies and considering the ways that the ideas that we have around supporting families and engaging them well, I wanted to take a moment to just really think about why do we need these unique approaches to recruiting, engaging, and supporting families of color. First of all, we know, Alicia mentioned it briefly, that racial disparities are real, right? They occur at nearly every major decision-making point along the child welfare continuum. And as we recruit families of color, we need to be keenly aware of the impact the child welfare system has had on those communities of color. At a national level, African-American families are overrepresented in reports of suspected maltreatment and are subjected to Child Protective Services investigations at a much higher rate than other families. And in addition, African-American and Native American children are at a higher risk than other children of being confirmed of maltreatment and placed in out-of-home care. Nationwide, Black youth are overrepresented in foster care, and in 2018, Black children represented 14% of the total child population, but 23% of those children were in foster care. When we're talking about how we can support families, this is one of the ways that we need to really acknowledge that disparity and disproportionality has impacted that community. We also need to acknowledge as people working in this system that there is structural racism. Think of it as historical policies and cultural dynamics that were created. In plain terms, structural racism shapes, affects, and affects the lives, the well-being, and the life chances of people of color. For example, Jim Crow laws, financial practices, not allowing people of color to purchase homes, the criminal justice system, and some may even say the child welfare system as well. In addition, we need to acknowledge that there are cultural differences that truly speak to how we engage families. Cultural differences impact every aspect of a person's life, from the way they communicate to how they receive feedback. Acknowledging and trying to do better in understanding where families of color are coming from, what cultures are within their own home that is different from their community is part of how do we engage families well. If you take all these things into consideration, the disproportionality and disparity rates, structural racism, and cultural differences, these are the reasons why we need to do better at providing unique supports to families who we're trying to engage and recruit for child welfare. And what does recruiting and supporting families of color look like? When we're talking about developing and recruiting and supporting families of color, we need to think about a few pieces. First is when we're talking about developing culturally responsive practices. That means we're acknowledging, as I said previously, the historic distrust that the child welfare system and families of color have because of their children being removed at a much higher rate. We also need to remember when we're talking about having developing culturally racial responses and practices, that we really think about how we can license families in. I think a long time, I've been in child welfare for a long time, working in the system, and oftentimes we're trying to rule families out. In communities of color, licensing in people who will support the family. Almost everyone we know can sign up for a class. Not everyone can be a foster parent, but we can definitely remove barriers to ensuring that families can be licensed in. For example, being flexible with our time. I think if quarantine didn't teach us anything, it definitely taught us that we could still reach families virtually, that we could still provide trainings that meet a family's need. And in the same way, we need to make sure that we're meeting people where they are. So as we're reopening, as the world is reopening, we need to ensure that we're modifying our training schedules to accommodate people's jobs schedules. We need to provide one-on-one licensing whenever possible. Saturdays are a great option for families. And then we need to also make sure that if families are struggling with filling out the forms or completing tasks in a timely manner, that we step in and assist in supporting them with, it could be anything from completing a form to explaining a form. But this is all part of developing culturally responsive practices. When we're talking about recruiting and retaining families of color, we need to understand and respect family dynamics. And we need to identify who are the decision makers in the family, and then begin to work with them on building the trust, building the respect, and also building supports. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about licensing the village. A lot of families of color, my own family, when I think about my own family, I wasn't just taken care of by my parents, but my grandparents were available, my aunts and uncles were available. And so how do we look at, when we're licensing a family of color, to consider licensing or training up their village to support these children in ways that they need. When we do a home study on a family, we can try to incorporate people who will be part of that child's life. Bring in grandma and grandpa, bring in auntie and uncle and interview them and make them part of, identify them as a support network, because that's really what they're going to be. And then go where families of color frequent. Churches are great. And I think for a long time, child welfare has felt like, oh, we need to get into churches to find Black and brown families. But the reality is you can churches, but you can also go into sororities. You can speak at historically Black college alumni groups, and you can partner with organizations within your own community that are engaging families of color well. If you build the trust with those folks, you can then start to become part of the community where these families are living. And then finally, engaging communities of color in policy development to build relationship equity within Black and brown communities and systems of care. Give families the facts. I think oftentimes we may not want to make someone upset. We may want to, work on how do we present the facts in a transparent way, reaching and retaining all families, and being honest with them. Getting licensed and fostering is a process, and it is not an easy one. Being honest about the time frame of all these pieces as best as you can. Thinking about ways to take the mystery out and address the barriers is key for families who are considering becoming foster parents. And then I truly believe that when you break down barriers for families who are in the margins, right? People of color, low-income families, non-traditional families, you will end up helping everyone in your system of care. Passing it on to Kenisha.
Thank you, Ligia. So for the next little portion here, we're going to talk really about some specific strategies that you can use to targeted recruit for children of color in the child welfare system. So right now, or this data as recent as 2019, so it's very similar to the same, but 14% of our general population of children are Black, yet 23% of those kids are in care. So we can see that there's a huge disproportionality for our Black children in care. I worked in the field for 8 years and there was no conversations around this. I didn't talk about it. We saw that there was a disproportionality, but there wasn't a lot of focus on how can we find families that look like our children. How can we make sure that our hiring practices, our workers look like the kids that we're recruiting for and things of that sort. So I really think it's important that to start this journey to effective recruitment, that you have a roadmap and strategies to be able to collect data for your agencies and your zip codes and really use that data to act on an approach and have a plan in place to target recruit. So as part of the MPLD program, I came up with a research question that if adoption workers and recruiters and licensing workers, pretty much anyone who was involved in recruiting for children of color, if they had training that focused on learning about transracial adoption, talking about strategies to recruit families of color, and having strategies about how to collect the data, that it would ultimately change their recruitment plans and their efforts. And ultimately, we'd have an increase in the number of homes. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about a roadmap of that data collection, and hopefully you'll start to hone in on processes that you can take back to your own agencies to work on the recruitment for your Black and brown children that may be on your caseload, and really work towards lowering the disproportionality of Black and brown children in our system. So this is a little bit of what I did. So for our roadmap, and the roadmap that I'm giving you today, is one of the first things you can do is analyze your current recruitment plans. What do your current recruitment plans look like? How many activities do you have on your recruitment plans? Are any of them targeted towards the disproportionality population area or the disparity population? You know, not just only our Black and brown kids, but do you have activities around our LGBTQIA plus community, our Native community, medically fragile, our teen kids, things like that, when you're thinking about analyzing your recruitment plans to see what they look like currently. Then you can analyze your data that you've collected from over a period of time. So take a chunk of time, maybe it's the year 2020 to 2021, and you want to look at some specific data. How many families did you license? How many of those families were children of families of color, excuse me. Were those families open to receiving children of color in their home, or was there an exclusion around that? So we can look at cross-racial placements. How many children of color were available for adoption? How long were they available for adoption? Things like that. Another thing you could do is get feedback from your recruiters and the individuals who are doing the work on the cases. So make a survey and disseminate a survey to recruiters and adoption workers and whoever else has their hands on recruitment in the community at different agencies, and get a feedback from them to see what are they using currently that may be working, or what are they using currently that's not working. From there, you can hold focus groups with some of those individuals, maybe recruiters on different levels, starting at agency level all the way up to state level, maybe even getting in some of those national level focus groups to see what's working for particular states or what's working for particular regions. So you can bring some of those ideas back and see what works for you. And then don't forget that along the way, you might have some flaws or some struggles in your data, that you might see an inconsistency. For example, when I was doing this work, I saw a huge inconsistency in my collection of my Native data, my Native population, because workers, when they were inputting the data into the system, they were just assuming if a family had Native American heritage, or just guessing if they did, and not really asking the family or having that conversation with them, which we know is really important and hones back into our ICWA laws and things around that. So this is a way, you know, a little bit talking about disseminating that survey, a way to collect your data for your agency, sending out a survey that asks specific questions like, to what extent have you been successful in recruiting for children of color in your counties? What work are you and your current team currently implementing to recruit for children of color? What does the diversity of your team look like? Really talking about why it's so important for our teams to be diverse, correct? And our teams, our workers to look like the kids that they're recruiting for, to give our kids that safe space and someone that they're open and willing to be able to talk to. And do your workers have any ideas, or do the workers have any ideas for targeted recruitment in the BIPOC community? Because some individuals might have some ideas and they're just maybe nervous to say it in person or speak up at a table at a meeting, but maybe they'd be okay with answering anonymously in a survey. One of the next things you can do is you can hold a focus group. So I did this on several different levels. I held focus group, regional focus groups and statewide focus groups to just really hone in on what was working, right? So you can have focus groups with private agency recruiters, state recruiters, maybe you work alongside Wendy's Wonderful Kids, or maybe there's individuals in the community that are doing specific work around adoption or working with the BIPOC community, and you want to just hone in on to what they're doing a little bit. So think about having some of those focus groups in your community so you can really bring some feedback to the table and analyze that data to see if some of those ideas will work for you. Now, remember I said that along the way, you are going to get some struggles of your data collection, right? So the struggle will challenge you and it'll help you, but it'll help you challenge you in a way to get a positive outcome. So like I said a little bit earlier, I had that inaccurate correction of Native data. So I had to go right to the source. I went to the Office of Native American Affairs and I said, hey, can I get the correct analysis of what individuals on our cases have Native American heritage and who does not, so I can make sure that I'm looking at the right percentage of individuals and presenting the right data so no one gets the data. How that I knew that I was incorrect is I was presenting this in a meeting and someone came to me and said, hey, Kenisha, someone that works for the Native American Affairs Office said, hey, Kenisha, you know, this data is a little bit wrong. Where did you get it? And I said, you know, I got it right from the system. And they said, well, yeah, there's some inaccuracies and we have the correct data that we can get you in contact with to be able to make sure that you're presenting out the right information. So sometimes you're going to have those little discrepancies in collection. And that state individuals were collecting data differently than regional individuals or certain office individuals. With that being said, you know, I had to make sure that we were all on the same page with that. There wasn't, you know, a lot of communication going on between the state individuals and the lower individuals. So, you know, in our focus groups, I brought them together so we could brainstorm around ideas of how we wouldn't miss that information. Okay. So I want you to take some time here when I was asking those questions a little bit earlier that I said to send out in your survey, but do some self-reflection about what's working at your agency at your level right now. Like, to what extent do you feel that your agency has been successful in recruiting for BIPOC children in your communities? Do you have individuals on your team that support the diversity of the individuals that you're recruiting for? And do the recruiters in your area resemble the children that they're recruiting for? It is so important, like I said, because sometimes this can be just as simple as the child feels safe having conversations with individuals on the team that look like them. The disproportionality of the children of color in care is so apparent that we want to make sure that we're creating a safe and courageous space for our workers to have the conversations with the kids and for the kids to feel safe in having conversations with the workers. Another thing to keep in mind on this roadmap is thinking about the tiers of recruitment practices that you have in your current jurisdiction. So in my current jurisdiction, I work in the state of Michigan. We have private agencies who do adoption. All of our adoption is privatized. And then our DHHS, or our government entity, does a lot of our foster care and our CPS cases. So when it comes to recruitment, a lot of that's coming from the private agency side. And then we grow to our counties. We have 83 counties. That means 83 different counties doing 83 different types of recruitment plans. And then we can go even to another tier of looking at it on a regional level, broken down a little bit more. We have 5 regions. So that's however many counties in each of those regions doing different types of recruitment and having different recruitment plans and collecting different types of data. And then we have our state level. So it's easy to see how at different points, whether it's private agency or county level or regional or state, that some of that data can get misconstrued, or some conversations or bridges aren't being gapped because of conversations not happening at different levels. Now, above all this, we have our federal level rules that we have to follow. Thinking about how we have MEPA and IEPA, right? We can't replace this narrative for MEPA and IEPA. These are federal laws that are put into place how we govern placement decisions, and saying that we cannot make race the initial decision for our placement of our kids. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to take it into account. That doesn't mean that we're going to ignore it completely. That just means that we can't make our placement decisions based solely on race. We do have to make sure, though, that there are rules in place that say that we have to make sure that our kids' cultural needs are met. You'll see here it says that we have to make sure that we have a pool of families that reflect the communities that we serve. So there are other things and bullet points that we have to meet to make sure that our kids' needs are met. And if we have this huge disproportionality of our Black and Brown kids, what are we going to do to make sure that their cultural needs are being met, their ethnic needs are being met, things of that sort, correct? So next, we're going to talk about some tips that you can take back to the office or your county of jurisdiction or state of jurisdiction to really go into connecting with our BIPOC community for targeted recruitment. So the first thing that you can do is include members of diverse community in your recruitment efforts. This means making sure that you have a diverse staff. You know, if you do not have a diverse staff, connecting with the community, maybe you have some individuals that you've had as foster parents or adoptive parents in the past that you can bring on as a mentor to have a conversation at your orientation or your classes with your parents about what it looks like to take cross-racial placement, or what it looks like to build partnerships with our BIPOC community. Okay, if your agency is predominantly white or new to recruiting diverse families, take time to assess and reassess on an ongoing basis the agency's cultural competence. Okay, so I have included a self-assessment that y'all can use at your agencies. This cultural diversity self-assessment is a 30-some question questionnaire that you can take to see where you're at on your journey right now to cultural competence. For us to be able to serve and have conversations with our families and recruit for the BIPOC community, we have to be comfortable with having conversations around race equity. We have to be comfortable with having conversations around DEI work. We have to be comfortable with having conversations around cultural competence. And building our capacity is the only way that we're going to be on a right path to be able to do that. So not only do you want to do a self-assessment, but you want to make sure that you're continuing to reassess, because things change over time. You build your capacity, and you'll want to see where you want to build your capacity in another area along down the road. And making sure that your office too, or the higher ups at your office, if you're a manager at your office, making sure that your staff has a safe and courageous space to have this conversation and invite it into the room. Tip number 3 is take time to build trusting relationships with communities of color. Take time. We're not just gonna sign up for every fair or community event and just set up a table and call it a day. We want to be intentional when we're building these relationships and make sure that they're trusting. You can think of things around doing activities around Black History Month and Juneteenth and Asian American Pacific Islander Month, Pride Month, definitely doing things around those times, but also creating a space to have lasting conversations and trusting conversations when you're at those particular events. Number 4 is to emphasize and tailor. Emphasize and tailor community education efforts for the intended audience. So when you're collecting your data or when you're learning about building your orientations or your classrooms for your foster parents and adoptive parents who are interested in starting the process, making sure that you're collecting cultural and ethnographic studies to target these specific groups of individuals, target specific neighborhoods of color, making sure that you're including cultural references and pictures on your flyers and pictures on your learning materials that look like the individuals that you are recruiting for. Tip number 5 is to enlist support from diverse churches. Now, we know that the Black individuals are very involved in the faith-based community, but it's not just Black individuals. You know, we want to reach out just beyond the Black community. We want to look at all BIPOC individuals, and you can make connections with churches in other areas. Approach and build relationships with the pastor or another church member. We're thinking about individuals, maybe foster parents that go to that church, and you can make a connection with them and start to build that trust. And then you can get into going up to the pastor and having that conversation, or someone from the clergy or whatever it may be. And then a sixth step that we can take today is to reach out with the types of people whom your agency has successfully recruited for before. So this is where we're going to leave no rock unturned. We're going to do everything that we can to tie in our efforts to compiling our recruitment plans. We're going to make sure that we're being intentional with our recruitment plans, right? Every agency should be tracking the types of families that they are licensing or that they are studying for adoption, so that you can reach back out to those families and talk to them about building and developing new recruitment techniques. Maybe send a survey to your families that you've worked with in the past to see what kind of recruitment techniques they think would work. And then lastly here, I've included a slide that if you want more information or additional training about this material, there is a 3-hour training that I created around targeted recruitment that we go inside and look real deep into the data. We talk about cross-racial placement conversations, and we really talk about these tips in detail, which you can reach out to the Office of Workforce Development and Training through the state of Michigan to request that. Or we also have a race, equity, diversity, and inclusion office if you just want some more training or materials around cultural competence. And then lastly, Erase, Eliminating Racism and Creating Celebrating Equality, is a company here in the state of Michigan that does national webinars around systemic racism. And they have a 2.5-day training that I think every office or team should go through. So you can really look at breaking down the structural racism and how to really look into how systems are built and how racism feeds into all of those systems. So I'm going to pass it on to Alicia.
Great. Thank you so much, Kenisha. And every time I hear Kenisha present, I learn something new. I have new ideas sparked. And so I hope that hearing this presentation from Kenisha really is helping everyone think about some new strategies, some new considerations, maybe some new ways to approach some of the strategies that you're already using. I think there's so much to learn and to think about in terms of dynamics, especially around building trusting relationships, creating safe spaces and trusting places for our children in care to see themselves reflected in the workforce, ways to use the data. So always so many great ideas. Now we want to keep the conversation going and continue to share some additional strategies. Many of the things that we'll touch on here in the next few minutes really connect to ideas that Kenisha shared. So we're kind of building on that and reinforcing that. But we know people always attend these sessions wanting to have some strategies and tips that you can take back to your work and really put to use. So as we go through these strategies, I hope you'll be thinking about ways that you could use these ideas, ways you maybe need to adjust it a little bit to make it fit for your organization, for your team, or for the communities you're working with. But hopefully this will spark some thinking in ways that you can do targeted recruitment and ongoing support and development of your families for children who are waiting to be adopted. So Kenisha touched on this certainly quite a bit, but I want to highlight this idea of partnering with communities as part of your targeted recruitment. But beyond the idea of community partnership and community engagement, we really want to emphasize this idea of identifying those champions in the communities, those trusted voices, those leaders, whether in official or unofficial positions, but people who are really known as trusted community members and leaders who you can connect with, and they can help you build additional relationships. They can be a point of contact and a point of entry to connect with broader communities. We know that often as we're trying to do targeted recruitment in new to us communities, we may not know where to go, and we may not know if we'll really be listened to if we show up. And so often it's helpful to look at how can we connect with those people who are champions for the community, for children, for families, and how can we listen to their expertise and really be guided by their insights about how we can best engage. And I think this is one point where it's helpful to mention that often we as people doing the recruitment may not be the most effective voice to actually try to engage broader communities. But if we can be guided by those champions and those trusted partners in the communities, they can tell us, you really need to connect with this person, or have them maybe put the message out at a community forum or at a service at the church. So having people who we can really build those individual relationships with can be a way into communities where we're really seeking to recruit families. Another key piece, and Kenisha touched on this, but it's really important to think about having the messages, the images, the photos that you have in your recruitment materials and in your informational materials really share the story and paint the picture of the children for whom you're recruiting families and of the families that you're looking to recruit. So make sure that those photos, those messages really resonate with people who you are seeking to recruit. Let people see themselves in those photos and see families that look like theirs, doing activities that they might do. It helps personalize the recruitment. It helps make it feel like families really are welcome by our agency or by our child welfare system if we have materials that really help send that message.
Thank you, Alicia. Another strategy to really consider, and I think we've all hit on this at some point in this webinar, is that we need to acknowledge that there is a historic distrust of the child welfare system, especially amongst families of color, because their children are being removed at such a higher rate. And then we need to take steps to build that trust. Part of taking those steps is connecting with the community, figuring out who is servicing that community well. And again, like Alicia mentioned, who are those champions? Who, is there a food bank? Is there a local church that has really taken on this initiative of foster care and adoption? And how do we partner with them to ensure that we are helpful? Again, we can talk about this over and over again, but it's really one of the things that could cause harm if we're trying to recruit families of color, is that if we at first, before even engaging them, don't acknowledge, hey, there's a problem here, we probably need to look at it. Disparity and disproportionality rates are high for children of color. How can we support and ask a community to help us that also feels like they are very much victims in this system? And so I think that part of those pieces require training. I know that Kenisha mentioned some, and we'll talk a little bit more about MPLD in the next couple of slides, but just taking time to really acknowledge that there is a distrust, that it is based on valid data, and then finding ways to overcome that. Another step that I think is really important is including members of the African-American community in your recruitment efforts. There's this saying that I love that says, nothing about us without us. Oftentimes, I've been in the work of child welfare for 20 years. I've sat in those meetings where we're trying to figure out how can we recruit more families of color? How can we engage them well? But we never asked them. We never centered it on what they wanted, how they felt like it would be the best way for us to reach out. And so just thinking through those pieces and making sure that we're taking the time to, like Kenisha mentioned, possibly a focus group, some members of your foster and adoption support groups that are families of color, bring them in, ask them what went well, find out what didn't go well, and then help them be a part of this conversation on how you want to do this differently moving forward. I think once we can kind of have that conversation and think through, right? Nothing about us without us, centering it on the people that we want to serve and the people that we want to engage well, it can change how we navigate and how we move forward with targeted recruitment strategies.
Okay, so some additional strategies as we think about targeted recruitment. One of the things that we know, we've all talked about it a bit, I think, throughout this session, and you're probably already doing this in your work, but exploring ways to participate in various community events, cultural celebrations, other special activities, whether that's a month that celebrates a particular heritage or a topic, but also thinking about those smaller celebrations, those community events, if there's a community fair that's really important, or an event that happens at a church or another faith community, thinking about those as key opportunities where you can participate. But one of the things that we think is really important to think about, and it really, this thread runs through our conversation today, of really having this kind of humility and this taking the time to build trust and to really listen to the voices of the people in the community that you're trying to connect with. It's really important to be thoughtful and intentional about how best, if at all, to participate in these events, and recognizing that some community events, some celebrations, some gatherings are more or less appropriate for conducting actual recruitment activities. And so for some of these events, it may be encouraged, you may be invited to have a table or a booth or put out information about foster care and adoption, or you might be able to do that if you know how to put in that request. That might be welcome and it might be an appropriate fit. But for other events, that might not be an appropriate fit. That might be seen as disrespectful or taking attention away from the focus of the gathering. And that's where we really need those community relationships to help guide us so that we can understand, is this an opportunity where we should look at distributing information, or maybe be able to say a few words about children who are in foster care and about the importance of recruiting families for children? Or is this an event where it's fine for us to be there, but our best way to show up is to attend and be quiet about it, just attend as a participant and really connect with people, build relationships, observe the dynamics and understand the event, and really respect the purpose of the event. So as you identify opportunities in various communities, especially as you're finding those community champions, these can be some of the questions that you can ask. Would this event be an opportunity to share information about our recruitment efforts? Or would this be a better fit for us to just attend and be a participant and show that we are showing up and wanting to connect more with the community? So all of these participation can be as part of your relationship building and trust building. But one of the great ways to do that is to really show that you recognize some events really aren't at the right time for us to show up in our child welfare system roles or our agency roles and put out a request to the participants. Sometimes it's best for us to let them have that be their event, and we're just honored to be allowed to attend.
Early and ongoing support as a strategy. I've said this for many, many years. I think customer service standards in child welfare are necessary and critical. And if we establish customer service standards based on input from families, right, we're going to center that around what families believe that they need, including a focus on being culturally competent and applying that to our customer service practices. I think that we can actually do better work and engage families better for the long term. And again, it's things like returning a call, keeping commitments, making sure that we have deadlines for when we are responsible for submitting things, but also making space for families to share their grievances, concerns, and their hopes and dreams with us in spaces that feel safe to them. We also need to consider engaging with families to help them recognize their strengths and not just their needs. I think, we are, as child welfare staff, we are often focused on what needs to improve, but sometimes we need to pause and take a step and let families know, you guys are you're doing wonderful work in this area. I see that you have a strong support network. You've completed all the trainings, you're applying what you've learned, you're asking questions, and here are some areas that we feel like we can support you additionally to help you grow and develop in those areas. And I think if we can look at our work in that way, families will then benefit from them as well. And again, I feel like this is part of the whole customer service standard conversation, where we follow through with our commitments and our time and meet our timelines. When we do this, families feel respected and supported. It's exceptionally important in communities of color where they have disproportionately been impacted by the child welfare system. And at the same time, we're asking them to help us care for these children. And then families don't feel respected or supported because we aren't communicating clearly. So it's not just about always being on time, but it's the piece of, hey, Miss Marcy, I'm calling to let you know that I'm just not going to be able to make it today because of court, and explaining, being transparent about not necessarily a case, but what is holding you up, and that it wasn't that you just, they just fell off the radar. I've had many families call me when I was doing direct line work and say that some of their frustrations were surrounding people not showing up and then not calling to let them know that they weren't going to make it. And so that's just one example of a sea of examples that we could use. But again, it all ties back to that customer service standard. And are we layering that with a culturally competent customer service practice? If a majority of your family are Spanish speaking, do you have Spanish speaking staff? Are the documents that they need to fill out in Spanish? Are we providing training in Spanish? Those are just things to be considering as you're trying to think about different ways to engage communities of color.
Great. And so then as we think about some more strategies for this approach for really sustaining this pool of families, we've highlighted recruitment approaches. Ligia talked about some of the early and ongoing support you can provide. We also want to touch on a few ideas for your ongoing training and knowledge and skill development of your families. So thinking about that whole continuum of recruitment and development and support, that's how we get that pool and sustain that pool of families that we need. So one thing you can really be intentional about is having meaningful and representative diversity in your trainers, in your pool of trainers and speakers, the people who are participating in your orientation sessions, your information sessions, pre-service training, ongoing training, thinking about who's at the front of the room, whether that's literally or virtually now, who's delivering the training information, who is sharing insights about the experience of foster parenting or of adoption, and do you reflect the diversity of the children in care in your diversity of your trainers and speakers. And this is a great way to think about one of Kenisha's suggestions, where you can look at if your staff is not diverse and does not reflect the race and ethnicity of children who are in care in your system, are there ways that you can engage mentors? Can you engage your experienced foster and adoptive families? Can they be co-trainers and presenters and speakers? But really having that be a part of that intentional effort to have diversity throughout all pieces of this work, so that prospective families and prospective parents who are coming through this process, again, that they see diversity in the staff that they're interacting with, and they have that shared experience reflected in the presenters and the speakers who are sharing information in these sessions. Another thing you can think about as part of ongoing training and development, this can be informal training sessions and information sessions and just other information sharing, is to be really proactive about sharing information with prospective parents about the race and ethnicity of children who are in foster care. This can be part of your effort to share information in general about who are the children in care, who are the children who are waiting to be adopted. This can be in addition to information about what number or what percentage of children are members of sibling groups, or how long for children who are waiting to be adopted, how long have they been waiting on average. This is before you get to child specific information, but sharing this information as part of the overall picture of who the children in foster care are in your system and the children who are waiting for permanency. It helps prospective parents have a better understanding of who are the children that we might be parenting, and helps them have that broader picture and their understanding of the system. Helps them also probably begin, if they haven't already, that exploration and that understanding of the nature of disproportionality and disparity in child welfare. And that can be part of their process in continuing to learn more about the child welfare system and how they may be able to be a resource to children. So now I think I'm handing this over to Ligia again. We have a next part of our conversation that really we want to have
Yeah.
you think about your piece in this work.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. And the next part really talks about how can you step into a different space now, right? What is the call to action? We know that racial equity and addressing disproportionality and disparity is critical to our system of care. But what can you do? What are steps that your organization can take? And so the first piece, the one that I wanted to focus on was, how can you build the capacity of your staff and their competency to partner well with families of color? Oftentimes, I think we keep talking about, let's go reach those families and bring them in, but then we run into our staff may not be may not have the capacity or the training to support those families of color. And so there are many trainings out there. I know Kenisha mentioned a couple that she's a super fan of, but I also wanted to mention a little bit about the Minority Development Professional Leadership Program, which I will talk about in a couple of slides. But I want to say this, that training is for staff. It is for staff of color, people of color who are working in the child welfare system. And for me, when I went through it, one of the best things that I learned, it wasn't just how to address disparity and disproportionality and how to really take a deep dive into the data, but then it was about how am I gonna create a new process for my system of care to be able to support children and families of color in tangible ways that have an impact. And so in thinking about how are we going to recruit more families of color and engage them, also think about how are you going to build the internal capacity of your staff to manage the work, but also care for families well.
And building on that, building that capacity of our staff, right? I wanted to focus on how, I challenge everyone and call to action for you to complete a cultural diversity awareness questionnaire for yourself, because all of this work is not going to happen if you don't focus on your own journey and your own building. I've definitely learned that over the years, right? I am biracial and I've had a lot of journey mountains through this process of going up and down of where do I fit, where do I belong, and how can I make sure that everyone around me is feeling included and feeling the inclusiveness as well. Also, making sure that your agency overall is doing a diversity awareness assessment as well, because it's not just you who has to do the work, but everyone on the team has to do the work also. So we're all getting that same message out there and getting that same message across. If there's one person that's not on board, the train's going to go off the track. And some of the numbers are not going to start to lower, and we're not going to see the percentages of the disproportionality start to lower.
And another challenge that we want to issue to all of you in this call to action is really identifying the importance of giving your staff, whether you're a leader or you can share this with your colleagues, but making sure that you're sharing with staff various resources, tools, articles, guides for maybe less formal peer-to-peer discussions, and other kind of information for that ongoing professional development, in addition to the great trainings and assessment tools that my colleagues here have mentioned. Thinking about what are those learning opportunities that can continue. So maybe it's in between various training sessions and more intentional in-service efforts. How can we continue the conversation? Are there articles that we can share with staff that maybe then we discuss over a lunch and learn or a virtual chat session? But thinking about how can we bring in multiple perspectives? How can we prompt these important discussions and questions and conversations, knowing that there may not be clear answers at the end of each of these things that we read or conversations that we prompt among staff, but making sure that we are continuing to highlight, here are really important perspectives and considerations, as well as tools that have concrete tips and action steps that people can take. But finding that balance in resources between here are 7 things you can do this week to improve your recruitment efforts, with some of these broader questions that people may need to wrestle with and think through and consider what it means for them and for the teams that they're part of. So that thinking about what are those resources and how can you intentionally bring those in. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, let's go. Sorry. Get to the resources slide. Great. So speaking of resources, we wanted to highlight just a few of the things that we have available through AdoptUSKids. All of the resources and services from AdoptUSKids are free for you to use. So we encourage you to go on our website, adoptuskids.org, and explore all of the resources. We've highlighted just a few of our extensive collection here, but these are things that we think may be helpful for exactly what I was talking about, for sharing articles or materials with staff, for maybe having some of these prompt a team discussion or some brainstorming for where your team and where your organization could go next with some of this work. So the first thing that we have listed here is a recorded webinar called Supporting Foster and Adoptive Families of Color, Stories and Strategies from Leaders of Color in Child Welfare. If you watch this, you'll get to hear more from my dear colleague, Ligia, as well as other colleagues, other graduates from the Minority Professional Leadership Development Program. A really rich webinar that brings in that lived experience from working in the child welfare system and sharing specific insights and takeaways from these stories with some practical ideas for what you can do in your work. Very powerful conversation that I think all of you will enjoy. We also have a few articles here that we're highlighting. One is called Successfully Recruiting and Supporting African-American Families. So presumably the title says it all there, with some ideas, some additional ideas and approaches for building that pool of African-American families for children in foster care. Another article called Finding More African-American Families for Children in Care. Again, great insights, strategies, and ideas that you can put to use in your work. And then this third article that we have listed is called Addressing Moral Injury in Our Profession. And this is one of those articles that I think is a great one that maybe opens some questions, prompts some self-reflection, may not leave people with all sorts of clear answers. This is not a 6 steps to solving everything kind of article, but it really prompts a lot of self-reflection as the author really talks about that journey of thinking about questions about moral injury and some dilemmas about working in the child welfare field itself. So I think it's a great one to read for all of us individually, but also then to think about what can that prompt for some of these internal discussions in teams and agencies and organizations. And the final resource that we have listed here, Data-Driven Diligent Recruitment, using data to recruit and sustain the pool of families you need for children in foster care. On this one, you'll get to hear more from Kenisha and me as we really dive into some of what she shared today and other approaches for really digging into your data and taking that approach for diligent recruitment to build that pool of families that you need and really reflecting the race and ethnicity of children who are in care. So recruiting foster families and adoptive families as part of that need. So we encourage you to look up all of these resources on our website and then use these as points of entry to find additional resources on our website that you may find helpful. Let's go to the next slide. Great. Ligia, I think you're ready to talk about this, so I will hand this over to you to share more about it.
I'm very ready to talk about this. I know we've mentioned it a million times on this webinar, but I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk to you a little bit more about the Minority Professional Leadership Development Program. It is a phenomenal 12-month program where national leaders from the child welfare system of color are built up to take center stage, to speak about the disparities that they're experiencing or witnessing in their system of care, to complete an action research project like Kenisha just shared with you, with tangible tools to help other communities develop their work in ways that will have a strong impact. During that program, you also will learn from national child welfare experts. And I can tell you, as being a fellow and now an alumni, that was the most exciting time for me, was just hearing from folks who had written all these articles and and done all these webinars and really been training our child welfare system for quite some time to then take time out of their schedules to come in and support us. And then a network with colleagues from all around the country. Kenisha and I weren't even in the same cohort, but we are like close friends now. And I think that's because we know the experience that we've lived through. And now we're doing the work to make sure that it changes for the better. And then that it provides us with the tools that we need to stand in the spaces where decisions are being made for children and families of color. And I can talk all day about Minority Professional Leadership Program, MPLD, but if you want to learn more, please visit the link here at AdoptUSKids. And then you can also, if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot them an email and they will get back to you. But good luck and thank you.
Great. Let's go to the next slide. And so that MPLD program, as you've heard us all talk about with great enthusiasm, is such a great resource. We are accepting applications now at AdoptUSKids for the next cohort for that. So if you are interested, or if any of your colleagues are interested, or if you know of people who you think should pursue it, even if they might need a little extra encouragement, that's often what we hear is people may need to hear from others that they would really be a great fit for that. We encourage you to look into that and for yourself or others, consider applying to be part of that next cohort. That is one of the many resources available through AdoptUSKids that we're really glad to be able to provide to the field, that experience in MPLD. As we've mentioned, we have all sorts of other resources, including articles, webinars, publications on our website, and we're always coming up with new things. And so we do encourage you to stay in touch with us. You can sign up for our newsletters. We have newsletters for the child welfare professional audience. We also have newsletters, email newsletters for families. So you can share those resources with the families that you're working with as well. We're also available on LinkedIn if you want to see where we're posting updates. These are great ways to hear about when we have upcoming trainings, webinars, presence at conferences, other opportunities, especially when we have applications being accepted for MPLD or other great opportunities. So we encourage you to find out more from us, and if you hear how we can be helpful. You can also always reach out to us and let us know what else we can do to support you in your work. We know you're doing such important work. And so we're here as a resource to you and your colleagues around the country. So with that, we are wrapping up our session for today. We wish we could be together in a room with you all in person for this session, but it has been a treat getting to present as our team here, the three of us. We are, as you can hopefully tell, very passionate about this work and this topic, and we're glad to be able to prompt some thinking for you, we hope, and share ideas that you can put to use in your work. So thank you for taking time to watch this session, and we hope that you have found it helpful for your work. Thanks very much.